Nobody expected her to move at night, not the legal teams who've been mapping every possible development in this case for months. Not the political strategists who get paid extraordinary amounts of money specifically to anticipate what the people inside this family do before they do it. Not the journalists who've built entire careers covering the Trumps and thought they understood the internal architecture of how decisions get made inside that marriage, inside that family, inside the carefully constructed world that Melania Trump has inhabited for 2 decades with a composure so complete it reads almost as supernatural. She moved at night, quietly, without announcement. Without the press release or the spokesperson's statement, or the carefully worded public communication that every previous action connected to this family has been wrapped in before it reached the world. She made a decision in the hours when cameras aren't watching and courts are technically closed, and the people whose job it is to anticipate exactly this kind of move had stopped anticipating because nothing in the pattern suggested it was coming. And when the legal world woke up this morning and found what she'd done, the word that circulated through every conversation, every phone call, every urgent text between people who understand what this means and why it matters was the same word every time: irreversible. Whatever Melania Trump decided in those late-night hours, she decided it completely. She didn't hedge, she didn't leave herself an exit. She didn't structure it the way someone structures something they might need to walk back when the political weather changes, or the legal terrain shifts, or the man at the center of everything applies the particular pressure that has always, historically, produced compliance from the people around him. She walked through a door and she closed it behind her. And the court that found that door closed this morning is now dealing with the implications of a decision that changes the shape of this entire legal proceeding in ways that nobody has fully mapped yet. So what did she do, and why did she do it now? And what does it mean for a case that was already the most consequential legal battle in modern American political history, before Melania Trump decided in the middle of the night to make it something more than that? Those are the questions, and the answers, when they fully emerge, are going to land harder than anything that's happened in this story so far. Let's start with what we know, because precision matters here, and the fog that surrounds any breaking development involving this family always creates space for speculation to rush in ahead of facts. The facts in this case are already dramatic enough without embellishment. Melania Trump filed a legal document, not through the joint legal representation that she and her husband have shared in various proceedings, not through a spokesperson issuing a statement that gestures toward legal action without constituting one, an actual filing with her name on it, through her own independent legal counsel that sources are confirming this morning she retained separately from her husband's legal team in the weeks before last night, without that retention becoming public knowledge. Independent counsel, her own lawyers. A filing that her husband's legal team did not draft, did not review before it was submitted, and did not know was coming until it appeared in the court record alongside everything else this case has produced. That sequence of facts is the story. Everything else is context. Because in the world of high-stakes litigation involving powerful couples, independent legal representation is never neutral. It is never administrative convenience or logistical efficiency. Independent counsel means independent interests. It means someone in that marriage looked at the legal landscape and concluded that what was best for her was not necessarily identical to what was best for him, and that the difference between those two things had become significant enough to require separate representation. Separate representation. Her own lawyers. A late-night filing they didn't see coming. That's what shook the court this morning. That's what has legal analysts reaching for historical comparisons and coming up short because the comparison doesn't exist. Not at this level, not in a proceeding this visible with stakes this high and a marriage this publicly constructed around a unified image that just revealed, quietly and irrevocably, that it was always more complicated than the image suggested. Let's go back. Because Melania's relationship to this legal saga has always been the part of the story that generates the most speculation and the least actual information. She has been present in the public imagination of this case without being present in any way that the legal record captures. A figure in the background. A woman photographed at airports and at Mar-a-Lago and occasionally at public events, her expression unreadable in ways that have generated entire industries of interpretation among people who want to know what she's actually thinking. What she was actually thinking, it turns out, was something that her late-night filing is now beginning to reveal. The financial arrangements at the center of this case, the property valuations, the inflated statements, the systematic misrepresentation of assets and worth that Judge Engoron found constituted persistent fraud. Those arrangements were not abstract to Melania Trump. She lived inside them. She occupied the triplex apartment at Trump Tower that financial statements claimed was 30,000 square feet when it is 11,000. She hosted events at Mar-a-Lago that was valued at $700 million on paper and $18 million in reality. She existed within the financial architecture that the court found was built on decades of deliberate misrepresentation. The question that investigators have been quietly asking for months is a simple one. What did she know, and when did she know it? That question is now considerably less quiet than it was yesterday. Because a woman who files her own legal document through her own independent counsel, in the middle of the night, in a case that centers on financial misrepresentation she lived inside, is a woman who has decided that the answer to that question is something she needs to control, needs to frame, needs to present in a specific way and at a specific time and through a specific legal mechanism that she chose, rather than one that was chosen for her. She got ahead of something. That's what lawyers are saying this morning in the careful language they use when they're describing something significant without fully committing to what it means. She made a move before a move was made for her. She chose the moment of her own legal positioning rather than waiting for investigators or prosecutors or her husband's legal team to position her without her input. That kind of move in legal proceedings at this level is called a lot of things: strategic, sophisticated, protective. The word that appears most consistently in conversations about what happened last night is the one that carries the most weight in the context of a marriage under extraordinary legal pressure: calculated. Let's talk about what the filing actually contains. Because the specifics matter enormously, and what sources are describing goes beyond what anyone anticipated Melania Trump would be willing to put in writing under her own name. The document addresses the financial arrangements of the marriage directly. It draws distinctions, legal distinctions with significant implications between decisions she participated in and decisions she did not, between representations she was aware of and representations that were made without her knowledge or input, between the shared financial life of a married couple and the specific business decisions that the court found constituted fraud. Those distinctions, drawn carefully and specifically by lawyers who understood exactly what they were drawing and why, serve a clear purpose. They create legal separation between Melania Trump's exposure and her husband's. They establish in the court record a version of her knowledge and participation that is her version, presented on her terms, through her counsel, at a moment she chose. Whether that version is accepted, whether it holds up under the scrutiny that it will absolutely receive from investigators and from the court and from her husband's legal team that is processing this morning what their own client's wife just submitted without their knowledge, all of that remains to be determined. But it is now in the record. It is now the starting point for any future examination of Melania Trump's role in and knowledge of the financial arrangements at the center of this case. She wrote her chapter before anyone else could write it for her. Here's the part that the legal analysts are finding most significant and most surprising. The filing doesn't just address her own position, it references conversations, specific conversations in specific contexts about specific financial matters that are directly relevant to the findings in Engoron's ruling. Conversations that she was present for. Conversations that, according to the document she has records of, conversations that, if the filing's characterization of them is accurate, significantly complicate the narrative that her husband's legal team has been advancing about what was known, by whom, and what it meant. Referenced conversations, her own records. Filed at midnight through independent counsel that nobody knew she'd retained. That's the development that's generating the most urgent conversations this morning among the people who understand what it means. Because conversations with records attached are not just characterizations, they're potential evidence. Evidence that Melania Trump has apparently preserved, apparently organized, and apparently chosen to reference in a legal filing at a moment that suggests she understands precisely how valuable that evidence could be in a proceeding that is still ongoing. Why now? That's the question that every analyst and every attorney and every person who's been watching this case is asking this morning. The timing of the filing, the middle of the night, weeks before certain appellate deadlines, at a specific moment in the case's procedural trajectory, that timing was chosen. Everything about this filing was chosen deliberately. And the why of the timing reveals something about what's actually happening beneath the surface of a case that the public record only partially shows. Sources are describing a specific trigger, not a general assessment that the moment had arrived, but a particular development in the case's progression that reached Melania Trump's awareness through channels that aren't fully clear yet, and that produced a decision she'd apparently been preparing for without making final. The trigger made her make it final. The trigger made last night the night rather than some future night that would have been chosen based on a different calculation. What was the trigger? That's the question that doesn't have a complete answer yet. But the shape of the answer is visible in the filing's timing and in the specific content that sources are describing. Something changed in the last 72 hours. Something in the case's development that reached Melania Trump through her own legal counsel and produced a decision that had been forming for weeks, crystallizing into action that could not wait until morning. She didn't wait until morning. That choice, that decision to move in the dark rather than in the daylight, tells you something about the urgency she felt, about the window she was trying to use before it closed, about the specific legal moment that her lawyers told her was available right now and would not be available in the same way if she waited. Let's talk about the marriage, because you cannot fully understand this legal development without understanding the relationship at the center of it, and the relationship at the center of it has never been simple or straightforward or fully visible from the outside. Melania Trump has spent 2 decades being interpreted, the expressions at public events, the moments on camera that seem to show something other than the unified front a political spouse is expected to project, the clothing choices that were read as messages, the absences that were read as statements, the presence at certain moments, and the notable absence from others, each one analyzed for what it revealed about a marriage that the public could see only through fragments deliberately or accidentally visible through the carefully managed presentation of a political family. What all of that interpretation produced was a portrait of a woman who was more complicated than the role she occupied, more independent in her thinking than the role required her to be, more aware of and more privately critical of the situation she inhabited than anyone in her position could afford to publicly acknowledge. The filing last night is the most concrete evidence yet that the portrait was accurate. Whatever Melania Trump thinks about her husband's legal situation, whatever she thinks about the decisions that produced Engoron's findings, whatever she thinks about the strategy of permanent confrontation that has defined his response to every legal challenge, she thought something different enough about her own position that she retained independent lawyers and filed an independent document through them in the middle of the night. That is not the action of a woman who is simply executing a legal strategy they developed together. That is the action of a woman who has made a calculation about her own interests and acted on it. Separately, quietly, completely. The implications for the marriage are something that neither party will address publicly in ways that reveal anything real. The public performance of marital solidarity will continue. The shared appearances will happen when they happen. The political narrative that requires a unified family will be served by the people whose job it is to serve it. But in the legal record, the record that exists independent of public performance and political narrative, something happened last night that cannot be unseen. 2 people who share a marriage and a legal situation filed separate documents through separate counsel representing separate interests. And the separation between those interests is now part of the permanent record of this case. Here's what Donald Trump's legal team is doing right now, because their response to this development is itself a development, and what they choose to do about it tells its own story about the internal dynamics of a legal defense that just got significantly more complicated. The immediate reaction among his attorneys, sources are describing, was not anger. It was something more controlled and more concerning than anger. It was assessment, rapid, focused assessment of what the filing contains, what it reveals, what it references, and what it means for arguments they've already made in proceedings that are still open. Because here's the specific problem the filing creates for Trump's legal team. Some of the arguments they've advanced, some of the representations they've made to the court about what was known and decided and discussed and by whom, those arguments may now be in tension with what Melania Trump's filing characterizes. And when a defendant's spouse files an independent legal document that creates tension with the defendant's own legal position, the tension doesn't resolve itself. It sits in the record, it gets examined, it gets used by investigators who are still working, by the court that is still deciding, by the appellate judges who will review the record and find in it a wife's independent filing that her husband's lawyers didn't know was coming. That filing is now part of the record they'll review. Whatever it says it permanently. Let's talk about Melania Trump's own legal exposure, because that dimension of this story has been almost entirely absent from public coverage, and it's the dimension that best explains why independent counsel and an independent filing make strategic sense from her perspective, regardless of what the filing's content reveals about the marriage. She was not a named defendant in Engoron's case. She has not been a target of the New York Attorney General's investigation in any way that has been made public. Her connection to the financial arrangements at the center of the fraud findings has been, in the public record, indirect. The buildings are his. The financial statements are his. The business decisions are his. But indirect connection in a fraud case involving financial arrangements that a spouse lived within, participated in, and in some cases was arguably aware of, indirect connection is not the same as no connection. And investigators who are still working, who are still examining documents and following threads and building toward whatever comes next, are not limited to what the public record currently shows about Melania Trump's knowledge and participation. She knows that. Her lawyers know that. And the filing last night, whatever else it accomplishes the specific goal of establishing her own version of her knowledge and participation before investigators establish their version for her. That's protective legal maneuvering at a sophisticated level. It's the kind of thing that lawyers advise clients to do when they assess that the client has exposure that hasn't yet been formally recognized and that can be managed better through proactive positioning than through reactive response. She's managing exposure on her own terms, through her own counsel, at a moment she chose, and the management strategy she's chosen involves drawing clear lines in the legal record between what she knew and what she didn't, between what she was part of and what was done without her. Those lines will be tested. They'll be examined against the documentary record. They'll be compared against the accounts of other witnesses and the findings of investigators who have access to material that no public account of this case has fully captured yet. But the lines are drawn, and drawing them first, before anyone else draws them for her, is the most important thing her lawyers could have advised her to do, and the thing she apparently decided in the middle of last night that she was ready to do. Here's what changes in the broader legal proceeding because of this filing. Because the implications extend beyond Melania's personal legal position and beyond the marriage and into the structure of the case itself in ways that will affect how the next several months develop. The independent monitor that Engoron appointed to oversee Trump Organization operations now has additional context for that oversight. Context that comes from someone who lived inside the financial arrangements being monitored. Context about how decisions were made, what information was available to whom, what the internal understanding of various arrangements actually was as opposed to what documents submitted to banks and tax authorities claimed it was. That context is potentially significant to how the monitor performs the oversight function. Oversight informed by insider accounts of decision-making processes is different from oversight that works only from documentary records. It can ask different questions, it can probe different areas, it can identify discrepancies that pure document review might not surface. The appellate judges reviewing Engoron's ruling will review a record that now includes an independent filing from the defendant's spouse that her husband's lawyers didn't know was coming. That filing is part of the record they assess. Whatever it says and however it's ultimately weighed, it exists in the record they're reviewing, altering the landscape of what they're examining in ways that weren't anticipated when the appellate briefing was structured. And the investigators who are still working, whose work the public record only partially shows, have now received a signal from someone inside the situation who chose to file independently rather than shelter behind shared representation. That signal, even before its content is fully analyzed, tells investigators something about the internal dynamics of the situation they're investigating. It tells them that the unified front has a seam, and seams, in investigations, are where threads begin. Here's the human dimension that gets lost in legal analysis. Because beneath the filings and the strategic calculations and the exposure management and the independent counsel, there are two people who've been married for almost 20 years, navigating a crisis that has no precedent in their shared experience or in anyone's shared experience. The pressure that this family has been living under for years, the simultaneous legal challenges, the criminal indictments, the civil proceedings, the financial penalties, the court-ordered oversight, all of it compressing the space available for anything resembling normal life. That pressure has consequences that legal filings don't capture. It changes relationships. It changes loyalties. It changes calculations that were stable when the pressure was lower. Melania Trump has navigated that pressure with the same composure she's brought to everything public. The expression that reveals nothing. The posture that suggests nothing can touch her. The performance of complete self-possession in circumstances that would visibly unsettle almost anyone else. But last night she did something. She made a move. Through lawyers she retained without announcing it, through a filing she submitted without warning anyone connected to her husband's defense, at an hour when the performance of composure wasn't required because nobody was watching. In those hours, she made a choice that her public composure would never have suggested was forming, a choice that separates her legal interests from his, that draws lines between her position and his, that establishes in the permanent record of a historic case that she is her own party with her own counsel representing her own interests. That's the human story underneath the legal development. A woman who has spent 20 years as a supporting presence in someone else's story, deciding in the middle of the night that the story she's in requires her to have her own chapter, written by her own lawyers, filed under her own name, through her own decision made at a time of her own choosing. Whatever that decision ultimately means for the case, for the marriage, for the family, that presents itself publicly as unified and revealed last night, something considerably more complicated than unity. It cannot be undone. It is filed. It is in the record. It happened. Here's where things stand right now and what the next period looks like based on what sources are describing to people who cover this case closely. The court will process the filing. It will be examined, assessed, and integrated into the existing record in ways that the coming weeks will make clearer. Trump's legal team will respond, and that response will itself be revealing about how seriously they take what their client's wife submitted without their knowledge. Investigators will read the filing carefully. Every reference to conversations, every characterization of knowledge and participation, every line that draws a distinction between what Melania knew and what was done without her, all of it will be compared against what investigators already have. The gaps between her account and their records will be examined, the alignments will be noted. The picture that emerges from that comparison will inform decisions that haven't been made yet about where the investigation goes from here. And Melania Trump, wherever she is this morning, knows that what she set in motion last night cannot be stopped, cannot be walked back, cannot be papered over with a spokesperson's statement or managed with a carefully staged public appearance, or explained away by the political machinery that has always been available to reframe every development in this family's story as something other than what it plainly is. She filed, independently, with her own lawyers, in the middle of the night. The court is awake now. The investigators are reading. The legal teams are assessing. The implications are forming in real time, in conversations we cannot hear, in analyses we cannot see, in decisions being made by people who understand what last night's filing means for a case that just got more complicated in ways that have no established playbook. Something that was always contained within the walls of a marriage and a shared legal situation just moved outside those walls, into the record, into the proceeding, into the permanent documentation of a moment in American legal history that has no precedent. The woman who said almost nothing for years just said something, through lawyers, in the dark, with her own name on it. And the silence that follows that kind of statement is never the silence of nothing happening. It's the silence of everything that happens next, forming itself in the space that one late-night decision just opened up. Watch what gets filed in response. Watch how his legal team characterizes what she did. Watch for the signals in the proceedings that follow about how the court is integrating what she submitted into a record that was already historic before she added her chapter to it. Something shifted last night in ways that the gold letters on a Manhattan skyscraper and the campaign rallies and the fundraising emails and the public performance of a family facing down persecution together cannot fully absorb or reframe or neutralize. She moved, quietly, completely, irreversibly. And the morning that followed found a courtroom, an investigation, and a marriage all dealing with the consequences of a decision made in the dark by a woman who had been quiet long enough to know exactly what she was doing when she finally chose to speak. The next chapter of this story has a new voice in it. And that voice filed its first words at midnight through independent counsel, without warning anyone who thought they knew what was coming next. Nobody did. And that, more than anything else about last night, is what changes everything about what comes after it.